Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Hosting can either feel like a thrilling way to connect or an overwhelming source of stress. Maybe you're worried your space isn't big enough, your menu isn't Pinterest worthy, or that you'll be judged for every little detail. But here's the thing, hosting doesn't have to be complicated or overwhelming. In this episode, we're diving into why we host, what makes it such a valuable experience, and how to approach it in a way that feels doable and fun. By the end, you'll have practical tips and maybe even a fresh perspective to help you create meaningful moments the next time you open your door. Let's get into it. Hosting can be such a mixed bag of feelings, right? Some people absolutely love it, while others avoid it like crazy. Maybe you've never been interested, or maybe you're curious, but don't really know where to start. For a lot of people, there's also relief in not being the host. A surprising number of us would rather not. So today, I want to unpack why hosting feels so different for everyone. We'll explore how gathering and eating together affects your body and your brain. And because I love a good throwback, we'll also look at how people hosted in different eras and what's changed and what we might want to revive. Finally, I'll share some tips to help you feel more confident and even excited about hosting, whether that's overcoming your fears or just finding your style. There's an art to hosting, and anyone can learn it. My hope is that this episode encourages you to get over your fear so that you and your guests can reap the benefits. Would you know where to start if you were hosting a dinner party or a social gathering? Would you feel nervous or anxious about it? Would the idea of possibly hosting just completely stress you out? Just a little piece of information. 50 years ago, hosting was a big deal. And I'll go through the different eras and what they did differently, but let's just talk about this for a second, because people used to go to all lengths to get it right. And they put a ton of effort in. And I thought about what was different then than today. And, it went through my mind that maybe they had more time. They were able to do it more. But arguably, their lives weren't much less busy than ours are today. And it's not like they have more time in their day. They only had 24 hours, just like us. And they certainly had stressors. I mean, there was a lot going on at different times in different eras. And those things could have easily caused them to want to stay home. And sure, it affected how they entertained, but they still entertained. They still got together. But I think one of the key differences was priorities. It was just simply more of a priority to get together, more so than it is today. And I think today we have a lot more distractions. They didn't have all of the same distractions that we have today. And when people did get together, it often felt like a formal event with handwritten cards being mailed out ahead of time and returned RSVPs. In some eras, there was assigned seating and live entertainment, even welcome gifts. Now, I'm sure images from The Great Gatsby or Downton Abbey might pop into your head. And maybe you grew up in a household that entertained, and your mom or whoever did the planning loved it and was really good at it. Or they did it begrudgingly and they secretly hated it and they got all stressed about it and were stressed about it after. Or in your home, maybe you never had guests over and never had dinner parties. You maybe didn't have the opportunity. So if I were to ask you, do you ever host? And if not, why? Why don't you host? Well, I imagine you might say, I don't have time, or it's too much pressure. My place is too small. I can't afford it. Well, my home isn't nice enough. And if I asked you that and you answered yes, your reasons might be because I host because no one else will. It's stressful, but it's important to me. You love seeing people enjoy themselves, or it's a chance for you to cook for people because you love cooking. Or you might say, I love getting getting it all ready and planning and transforming my home. What causes this difference in how we feel about being a host? Having people over, opening up our private lives and inviting people in. I think a lot of it has to do with how you were raised and what you're used to, your values too. If you think bringing people together is an important thing to do, if you feel good when people are over, your cup is full when everyone leaves. It could also have something to do with how much practice you've had. And I also think, based on what I know, it's often about your home. People worry if their home is clean and organized enough, if it's big enough, if they'll be judged on their decor. There's social pressures of hosting, feeding people the right foods, putting things in the right dishes, the order of how it's placed and the process of all of that. But it's interesting that there can be such a mixed bag of emotions. It obviously carries some weight. Yet, as I'll get into, there are huge benefits to moving through this and moving past some of these emotions. But before I get into the benefits, I just want to mention that if you find, after hearing this episode, that you might want to give it a try, if you have any inclination to want to host, I just want to say that you can learn before you do it. You can feel at ease and not feel like you have to learn on the fly. You don't have to feel like you have experience. You can plan ahead. Think about how you're going to tackle ahead of time. Get yourself prepared and feel calm about it on the day of. A bit of a story. When I was a junior designer, and I worked for a very small company, I had to go to site often. And actually, there was times where I was working for myself before I even started working for this company. I would take on projects as a solo designer, but I didn't have the experience behind me yet. And I remember going to site and feeling nervous that people were going to ask me questions and I was going to have to provide them an answer on the fly. And it was always this sort of like fear of, if I have to answer quickly, am I going to give the best solution to whatever the question was? And typically on site, it was like a construction related issue, a workaround, something that came up that was unexpected that we had to hash out and figure out kind of a plan B. And when I would go to site, I would be really nervous because I was there to meet a plumber. I was there to meet a contractor. I was there to, whatever it was. I was meeting somebody, a tile installer. And what I learned was I don't have to provide that answer right then and there in all cases. I can actually gather the information and go back to the office and either speak to a more senior person or do a bit of research or think it through or draw it out or whatever. In some cases, I would have to provide an answer right away because if it was time sensitive, but in a lot of cases, I didn't. And this reassurance of I can gather information and I can figure it out before I have to execute on this. And so I just share that with you because it's the same with hosting. If you've never done it, you can absolutely plan ahead, think it all through, and get yourself prepared before the moment. You don't have to be born a good host or have seen it firsthand. You can learn it and get good at it. And besides, when you are learning how to do it, you can make it your own. You can bring in your own personality and experiences. That way, it feels genuine to your guests and you feel good because you're being authentic. You can ask yourself, how would this or that make me feel less anxious? And create the experience around that so that you put yourself at ease and your guests can feel that. So how does hosting impact you, your body and your brain? What's going on inside when you open your doors to people, when you break bread? Well, before TV and iPhones, our modern technology, People needed social gatherings to connect with others. There was really no other way to connect aside from work, which many years ago, that was predominantly a man's world. And then with the TV and the iPhone, our form of entertainment revolved around a screen and not so much a dinner table. See, we naturally crave connection. And unfortunately, we tend to gravitate to what's the easiest, which is the reason why we watch TV or YouTube instead of getting together. It's accessible, it's there, it's instant with very little effort. So when people used to gather before iPhones and TVs, it was their opportunity to hear what was going on in the world, to get the news, to share ideas, to laugh, and to be entertained. Now people go to their devices for this, to social media, to YouTube. So things have changed in how we get our entertainment, but not why. The form of connection has changed, but not the desire for connection. And I want to stress connection because when we're talking about having people over, that's really what it's about. It's creating a block of time to connect, to have an experience and another form of entertainment. And I think today, more than ever, we need to find other forms of entertainment and to connect with each other in real time. And hosting is such a beautiful way to do this. Studies suggest that those who eat together are far more likely to feel better about themselves and be satisfied about their lives. So if you're feeling like you don't want to host because it causes feelings of stress or fear of judgment, remember this. When you eat with others, you will feel more satisfied about your life. I remember being a kid and seeing older family members sitting around our breakfast table for hours, just chatting and keeping whomever was in the kitchen company. And I think in North America, maybe lingering around a table after you finished eating isn't as commonplace in, say, places like Europe. But I remember many times where my family would just linger. They would just sit at the table for long periods of time. Several years ago, we were invited over to some friends for dinner, and they were having a group of people. And I remember after the dinner was done and we finished our meal, where normally people would say, let's move into the other room, they didn't. We weren't offered the option to move. So we ended up sitting there, and the whole group of us just sat there chatting amongst the dirty dishes, and we really enjoyed conversation. And I observed how that felt. For some reason, I really remembered lingering around that table. And I think there is something special about that, about lingering around a table with friends or family. So maybe the next time you host, you might want to try this. Just sit, enjoy, pour another glass of wine, just stay and see what happens. Studies suggest that people who eat together are far more likely to feel better about themselves and to be satisfied about their lives. So if you're feeling like you don't want to host because it causes, feelings of stress or fear of judgment, remember this. When you eat with others, you will feel more satisfied about your life. So I think that bit of information alone should cause you to say, hold on. If I'm feeling stressed about it, chances are after the fact, I might actually feel really good about my life. So not only might you feel more satisfied with your life, but studies also suggest that social interactions cause a release in oxytocin, which is the feel-good hormone. And oxytocin, when released, lowers anxiety and stress. It also builds trust and fosters social connections. So there's a lot out there right now saying how lonely people are. That loneliness is a huge problem in society for all ages. And I recently read that there's a decline since the 70s. So in the 70s, people started to watch a lot more TV. There was better programming and color, and they could record programs and watch them later. So people's form of entertainment really shifted. So could TV have caused this? I don't know. Food for thought, I guess. But the point is, people started hosting less and less. And if people are in fact more lonely than they used to be, imagine the impact you can have on people in your life by simply inviting them over, eating together and sharing conversation. Also, social interaction may actually modify our brains. It's said that it can activate neural circuits in the brain and boost cognition and mental resilience. And the last thing I'll say before I move on to the difference between eras and a few other benefits that affect you is you get to practice leadership and generosity, which activates the brain's reward system that will leave you feeling happier. You get to practice social rituals that preserve traditions, which calms the brain when there is structure and predictability that traditions have. So now you know some of the benefits, and I hope you choose to try it and feel the effects. And ask for feedback from your guests. See how they feel after they've had face-to-face connection. So let's go through some of the eras of entertaining and look at how they did it. And keep in mind that, of course, in different eras, whatever was going on in the world would have affected things like their food choices, the amount of guests that they had, or the style of entertainment. So let's start with the 20s. In the 20s, hosts often greeted their guests with a glass of champagne, which I love. I think that it just sort of sets the tone. It's like they get to have a little welcome chat, they give them a glass of champagne, and they come on inside. But during Prohibition, it could have been, the champagne could have been smuggled in, or they might have offered a non-alcoholic beverage. Maybe it started at the door was the non-alcoholic beverage, and then as they came inside, they offered alcohol. They might have had live jazz music, which I think is amazing to have live music at a party, even if it's just a gathering of, say, 20 people. 20s parties seemed to have kind of more of a rebellious side to them. And people did used to hide their alcohol in things like teacups so that they would not be detectable. And then in the 30s, invitations were often handwritten notes or they were word of mouth. But it was definitely a little bit more low key. There were things like potluck style dinners. And it was more modest. They played more sort of board games. In the 40s, this was post-war. It was more formal attire. It made a comeback and food was simple and they listened to big band music. In the 50s, it was more formal. Hosting was more structured, more so than the 40s. They typed up and mailed cards or they just made a phone call. Dinner parties were often themed with elaborate hors d'oeuvres and cocktails. Cocktails became a thing, like the classic martini and the Manhattans. In the 60s, it was more casual for sure, but with things like record players and fondues. Yeah, it was very sort of low-key and casual. In the 70s, there were themed parties and they were really a lot more elaborate. I mean, you can imagine the 70s disco era and you can picture what parties were like there. I always picture sort of the sunken living room and the shag and the different colors of the 70s. So that all came into how they entertained. But yeah, there was things like potlucks and fondues. In the 80s, it was excess. Hosts often wanted to impress. So some hosts did signature drinks and the presentation of the food was big with charcuterie boards or structured courses. Now let's talk tips. Tips to help you feel more confident and even excited about hosting. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of them, some things that I've read, some things that I've heard, and some things that I've tried. So the first one is to send proper invites. Don't just shoot a text. Do either handwritten or e-cards. I think that it's important to bring back a level of personalization. So just shooting out a mass text just doesn't feel as nice when you receive it. So imagine getting like a handwritten note. I mean, that would be amazing. So think about how you can elevate your invitation. The next thing is to make a playlist ahead of time. No one wants to be thinking about music on the fly, especially when you're a host and you've got to go around and chat with everyone and make sure everybody's doing well. The last thing you need is to have to think about the music. I've been in those situations before where I've got some friends over, and I mean, luckily this was a very casual kind of thing, so it didn't matter as much. But you're like, oh shoot, what should I put on? What do I feel like listening to? What do they feel like listening to? So it's an important thing to get ahead of it and make a playlist ahead of time, so you don't even have to think about it the day of and in the evening. The next thing is to think about your guests ahead of time. Look at your guest list and go through each and every person on the list and just think about a conversation you've had with them recently, or an observation you've made, or something that you've heard. Maybe you heard that they just got back from an amazing trip, and then just make a point in asking them. And this doesn't need to have any stress around it. Like you don't have to worry about making sure you go up to each and every guest and bring that something up. You can just prep yourself ahead of time so that as you're talking to them, it will be on your mind. You'll have already thought about it when you see them. Oh yeah, this person just went here, or this person had told me about this the last time I talked to them. And when you do this several weeks ahead of time and you review it for the weeks leading up to the event, it just makes it feel really natural and it will flow nicely. So do that, because that's just a little bit of prep on each person that's coming into your house and a way to make them feel special. And the next one, which is one that I read and I just loved, and it was said by Juana Peppa, and I think I'm pronouncing her name right, Juana Peppa. She's the author of the book, The Good Host. And she said, if you want to have a group of friends over, but cooking stresses you out, then she actually suggests just ordering in. And she even suggested ordering pizza. She said, get the best pizza around, but elevate it. So elevate it with, say, champagne. And she said, don't just serve the pizza with beer. If you serve it with champagne, well, immediately it feels elevated and feels special. So I love that, because I thought for people who do stress out about what to serve people or how that's done, or the plates to use or whatever, right? I mean, if you just order pizza, really good pizza, and she even said just to put the boxes right on the table. I mean, she did add to elevate that with candles and flowers, which I completely agree, but just food for thought. It's a great thing if you are worried about having to cook and prep all of that stuff. And then the next thing is direct eye contact. Don't forget the power of eye contact. When you have direct eye contact, it activates parts of the brain that will put your guests at ease. And think trust. You want your guests to feel they can trust you and that this is a safe space to relax and enjoy themselves. So as they come in, just make sure you give them some direct eye contact so right away they feel at ease. The next thing is to plan how you're going to serve your drinks. Are you going to top everyone up all night? Which, if you're nervous about hosting and all, everything that you've got going on, then to have to factor in topping up your guests all night might just put you over the edge. So don't do it. You might want to consider making a self-serve area. But don't forget to give them a bit of a roadmap so they don't feel awkward, right? You can offer maybe the first drink so you have the chance to let them know what the options are. And if there are cocktail options, you can explain those ahead of time, and then you let them know that there is a bar over there you will see and you can make your own drink, and maybe even have little how-tos. So if they want the cocktail that you offered them at the beginning of the night, there's a little instructions, a little recipe for how to do that. And everything's there ready for them to make it easy for them and easy for you. The next thing is to set things up the day before, from table to your decor to your furniture arrangements if you're going to move things around. That way it gives you a bit more time to see how it's looking and then to make adjustments if needed. And if you do it the day before, it just means that you get more opportunity to observe, and then you're not worrying the day of tweaking things and moving things around or getting things ready. And then the next thing is to create a timeline for the night. If there are any special things like games or food or and there's specific times that you kind of want to do this. If you have a bit of a framework for your night, then it just removes the guesswork. You are totally prepared. And the last tip is that people notice the focal points. So the eyes are naturally drawn to focal points. So if you're feeling anxious about people noticing aspects about your home that you don't like, just amp up your focal points. And you can do this with things like an oversized arrangement. Or if you're rearranging the furniture for the night, where can you place it to draw the eye? And the point is that you're drawing the eye from the things that are bothering you so that you can relax and enjoy your night. You can trust that you've redirected their eye away from the areas that are going to bother you. And you no longer need to worry about it. And I want to stress that because this particular trick is amazing. If you redirect somebody's eye to a focal point, you no longer need to worry. And just in closing, I just want to share a little story with you and something that I do. Every year, I usually host Christmas dinner, and it sort of varies in size, whether it's a few people or a larger group. But one of the things that I started doing years ago was making a very detailed list. Everything from what needs to be done ahead of time if I'm going to adjust recipes or try something new. So that's all documented ahead of time. And then I actually have a point form note with times on when every little thing needs to happen. And this starts the day before and then it runs for the day. And the reason why I did this was it was going to be one of my first years hosting this. And I knew that I had several people coming who had experience in this particular thing, Christmas dinner. They had done it themselves for many, many years. Now, I had already in previous years asked some of them, like, well, what do you do? Or, I picked up on some tips and some things that they did, but I knew that the day of was not a time to try something new or to adjust something, especially when it was my first time doing it. I really needed to stay focused, and I also really wanted to enjoy the day, and I wanted it to be a success. So I knew that if I had this very detailed timeline of how everything was going to be rolled out, when somebody asked me or offered a suggestion or on the fly said, oh, I should try this or I should do this or this is what they do or whatever, I was able to stay focused because all I did was say, okay, thank you, maybe I'll try that next year. And then I would just go back to my list. So it kept me on track and it kept my emotions in check because I didn't go sideways. I just stayed focused and was able to execute. And then if anyone had any questions, I just could point them to the list and say, here's what's coming next. Here's what has to be done. So then that way it allowed me to delegate as well. So I could pick and choose on that list ahead of time what I was going to, if anyone asked if I needed help, what I could say, here, actually, this would be a great thing for you to help with, because some people just love to help. They love to lend a hand and get in the kitchen, and that's great, but you have to be careful that it doesn't throw you off. So planning is so important, and having that detailed list, even now over the years, I've refined it, and there's certain aspects about it that I don't even need to look at anymore, but it certainly helps. So I've done that, and I would highly recommend doing that as well. Hosting doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be stressful. It's all about connection, creativity, and a little bit of courage to try something new. Whether you're diving into hosting for the first time or just looking to make it more enjoyable, remember, you have the power to create memorable moments for yourself and your guests that have health benefits. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I hope you feel inspired to bring people together in your own unique way. Until next time, take care and happy hosting. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the Support the Show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.